Ukraine has spent the past few years proving one powerful idea. Necessity drives innovation faster than anything else on Earth. From improvised drone engines built out of everyday components to inflatable decoys carefully engineered to mislead enemy radar and targeting systems, the country has continuously found ways to outperform expectations and to surprise adversaries who had long underestimated its industrial and technological capacity. Every time the world assumed Ukraine had reached the limits of what it could produce independently, Ukrainian engineers and defense companies found another way forward. But in early 2026, a new development may have pushed that innovation to an entirely different level, a level that military analysts across the world are now taking very seriously. A private Ukrainian defense company introduced something that could significantly reshape the battlefield, not just at the tactical level, but in ways that affect the entire strategic calculus of the war. The FP7. At first glance, it may sound like just another missile in a conflict already defined by missiles, drones, and long-range strikes. But in reality, it represents something much bigger. Something that changes the rules of engagement in a fundamental way. This is a domestically developed short-range ballistic missile, and its impact goes beyond its physical size. According to available reports, the FP7 is no longer simply a concept or a project in development. It has reached operational readiness. Engineers have moved past the drawing board. The system has been tested. And if that assessment is accurate, it could begin influencing frontline operations much sooner than many outside observers expect. So what exactly makes this missile so important? And why are military planners paying such close attention? To understand that, we need to look carefully at its capabilities, because the details tell a story that goes beyond the specifications on paper. The FP7 is designed with a strike range of roughly 200 kilometers, or approximately 120 miles. That range places a significant portion of Russian-held territory and rear area infrastructure directly within reach. Supply depots, command posts, logistics hubs, radar installations, all of these targets, previously considered relatively safe from rapid strikes, suddenly fall inside the threat envelope of a system that Ukraine controls entirely and independently. It can travel at speeds approaching 1,500 meters per second, well over 3,000 miles per hour. To put that in perspective, that is nearly 4 times the speed of sound. At those velocities, the missile is not just fast, it is operating in a regime where conventional air defense reactions are stretched to their absolute limits. At its peak trajectory, the missile climbs high into the upper atmosphere before descending rapidly and with tremendous kinetic energy toward its target below. Its warhead is smaller than many traditional ballistic missiles, but that choice is not accidental. It reflects a deliberate design philosophy, one focused on speed, mobility, and the ability to strike specific high-value targets with precision rather than relying on brute explosive force alone. And perhaps most importantly, the FP7 is designed with a relatively high level of accuracy, capable of striking close to its intended target within a tight margin. In military terms, this is known as circular error probable, and when combined with the missile's speed, even a modestly sized warhead becomes an extremely lethal instrument against the right targets. But one detail stands out above everything else: speed. From the moment of launch to the moment of impact, the entire flight can take only a few minutes, in some scenarios, potentially less. In practical terms, that means there is almost no time to react, no time to sound a meaningful alarm, No time to relocate personnel or equipment. No time to scramble interceptors or reposition air defense batteries. And critically, very little time to successfully intercept the incoming threat before it reaches its target. This is not a marginal improvement over existing capabilities. It is a qualitative shift in what Ukraine can do and how quickly it can do it. Now, while those specifications sound deeply impressive, there is still an important and honest question that must be asked. Does the FP7 actually perform as its developers claim? The first public glimpse came from a short launch video shared by the system's developers, footage that quickly circulated among defense analysts, military bloggers, and open-source intelligence communities tracking the conflict. The footage shows the missile lifting cleanly from its launcher, accelerating under its own power, and climbing steadily and stably into the sky above the launch site. That confirms several key things with a reasonable degree of confidence. The system exists as a physical reality, not merely a paper project. It launches successfully under real-world conditions, and it maintains stable, controlled, powered flight during the critical early phase of its trajectory. But beyond that, there is still limited publicly available evidence. There is no confirmed footage of a successful strike on an actual target, no fully independent verification of its operational range under combat conditions, and no direct proof yet of its claimed accuracy at maximum distance. So, if we evaluate the FP7 purely on the basis of what is publicly visible and independently verified, it might appear that the system remains largely unproven, promising but uncertain. But that perspective misses a critical and often overlooked piece of context. Ukraine's defense development process is fundamentally different from the long institutional timelines of traditional Western procurement systems. There are no multi-year testing phases conducted in controlled environments far from any conflict. No lengthy public trials carefully documented before a system ever approaches a battlefield. No bureaucratic approval chains stretching across multiple government departments and allied consultations. Instead, Ukrainian systems are developed rapidly by necessity, tested under actual operational conditions as quickly as possible, refined based on real feedback, and introduced into service when developers and military users determine they are ready to perform. It is an accelerated model born from the brutal reality of fighting a war where delay can mean defeat. This pattern has been observed repeatedly throughout the conflict. Other Ukrainian-developed systems have appeared publicly with limited fanfare, only for their actual battlefield impact to become dramatically clearer weeks or months later. Systems dismissed early as experimental or unproven have gone on to reshape entire operational dynamics, which suggests something important about the FP7. If a system of this nature is already being shown publicly, even in a limited and carefully controlled way, it is very likely far more advanced than what is being openly revealed. The limited footage may be entirely intentional, showing just enough to demonstrate that the capability exists and is real, but deliberately withholding enough detail to prevent adversaries from fully understanding its performance envelope, its accuracy characteristics, or its operational deployment methods. And that calculated ambiguity sends a very specific message to Russian military planners. There is a new threat. Its full capabilities are unknown, and it demands serious attention. But this raises a broader question that goes to the heart of Ukraine's strategic thinking. Why build a new ballistic missile system at all? After all, Ukraine has already demonstrated extraordinary effectiveness with long-range strike drones. Those systems have successfully reached targets hundreds, in some documented cases, over 1,000 kilometers from Ukrainian-held territory, striking oil refineries, airfields, ammunition depots, and military infrastructure deep inside Russia. So what does the FP7 add that those proven systems cannot provide? The answer comes down to one critical and irreplaceable factor: time. Long-range drones are extraordinarily powerful tools, but they are slow. Depending on the distance involved, they can take many hours to reach their intended targets, hours during which they follow relatively predictable pre-programmed routes with limited ability to adapt to changing conditions. That approach works exceptionally well against fixed targets, facilities that are permanently located, infrastructure that does not move, strategic assets that can be patiently tracked and struck over a long planning horizon. But the modern battlefield operates on a very different timescale. Targets move. Command posts relocate the moment they suspect they have been identified. Supply convoys disperse and change routes. Mobile artillery systems fire and immediately reposition. Battlefield opportunities appear and disappear within windows measured in minutes, not hours. The fleeting target problem is one of the defining challenges of modern high-intensity warfare. And that is precisely where a fast ballistic missile system like the FP7 becomes operationally decisive. Instead of waiting many hours for a slow-moving strike asset to arrive, the FP7 can reach a target located 150 kilometers in just a few minutes. That changes the entire decision-making calculus for commanders on both sides of the front line. A mobile command center identified behind the forward edge of battle can be targeted and struck before its occupants have time to evacuate. A logistics hub receiving a fresh supply of ammunition can be hit before those supplies are distributed to forward units. A convoy preparing for movement can be struck before it even begins to roll. In short, the FP7 enables rapid, time-sensitive targeting. And in modern high-intensity warfare, the ability to compress the time between target identification and target destruction often determines whether an opportunity is seized or lost entirely. There is also a second critically important dimension to consider, and it may ultimately prove more significant than any of the technical specifications: independence. The vast majority of Ukraine's most advanced and capable long-range strike weapons have come from international partners. Systems like ATACMS, Storm Shadow, and Scalp have proven enormously valuable, but those systems almost always come with conditions attached. Limitations on the range at which they can be used, restrictions in the categories of targets they can be employed against, and sometimes operational delays caused by the need for political approval from supplying nations before each new phase of their use. These constraints are understandable from the perspective of Ukraine's partners, who have their own strategic considerations and escalation concerns to manage. But from Ukraine's operational perspective, those constraints represent real limitations on battlefield flexibility and response time. A domestically produced missile removes all of those external constraints entirely. It can be used at any time against any legitimate military target within its range without requiring authorization from any foreign government or compliance with any externally imposed conditions. It gives Ukrainian military commanders a tool that is fully and exclusively under their own control, and that kind of operational freedom has enormous practical value that extends well beyond the missile's physical capabilities. But perhaps the most tactically significant difference between the FP7 and other strike systems lies in how the missile physically travels to its target. Because not all weapons move through the same part of the sky, and that difference matters enormously to the air defense systems trying to stop them. Drones and cruise missiles, the workhorses of modern long-range strike warfare, typically fly low. They hug the terrain, using hills and valleys to mask their approach from radar detection. They stay close to the ground, exploiting the physical limitations of radar systems that struggle to detect small, low-flying objects against the complex background of the Earth's surface. Over the course of this conflict, Russian air defense operators have accumulated significant experience in detecting, tracking, and intercepting these low-altitude threats. Procedures have been refined, systems have been repositioned, electronic countermeasures have been developed and deployed. But a ballistic missile behaves in a fundamentally different way that renders much of that accumulated experience largely irrelevant. Instead of flying low and slow, the FP-7 climbs high, very high, before arcing back down toward its target at extreme velocity. It approaches from above rather than from the horizon. Its descent angle, its speed, and its trajectory profile are all radically different from the low-altitude threats that Russian air defense crews have spent years learning to counter. This creates a completely different and far more demanding challenge for any defensive system attempting to intercept it. Many of the air defense systems currently deployed in the theater are specifically optimized to detect, track, and engage slower, low-altitude threats approaching from a relatively predictable direction. Intercepting a high-speed object descending nearly vertically from the upper atmosphere at hypersonic velocities is an entirely different engineering problem, one that even the most sophisticated systems in the world struggle to solve reliably. In some engagement scenarios, the total window available for detection, tracking, fire control calculation, interceptor launch, and successful interception may be measured in only seconds, which means that even highly capable systems may simply not have enough time to complete all of those steps before impact. Now consider what happens operationally when different types of strike weapons are deliberately employed together in a coordinated sequence. Slow drones approaching at low altitude from multiple directions, saturating the attention of radar operators and consuming interceptor missiles. Cruise missiles following the terrain at medium altitude from a different vector. And simultaneously, FP-7 ballistic missiles descending from above at extreme speed toward the highest value targets in the target complex. Suddenly, air defense systems are forced into an almost impossible set of simultaneous decisions. Which threat to engage first with the available interceptors? Which incoming weapon poses the most immediate danger to the most critical asset? How to allocate finite defensive resources across multiple simultaneous threat tracks arriving from different directions and different altitudes. With only seconds available to make those decisions under enormous psychological pressure, the probability of error increases dramatically. And a single error in that environment, a single interceptor fired at the wrong target, a single track lost in the confusion, can mean the difference between a defended installation and a burning one. This kind of deliberately layered, multi-axis pressure can overwhelm even the most sophisticated integrated air defense networks. But the missile's raw performance is only part of what makes the FP-7 a genuinely significant development. The way it is launched may be equally important from an operational survivability standpoint. Traditional ballistic missile systems are large, complex, and highly visible. They require specialized, purpose-built transporter-erector launcher vehicles that are difficult to hide and take significant time for preparation for launch. Locating and destroying those launchers before they can fire is a standard and well-established counter-battery priority for any defending force. And if the launchers are large, slow-moving, and require extended setup times, they become vulnerable to exactly that kind of preemptive targeting. The FP-7 takes a fundamentally different approach to this problem. Its launch system is designed to be simpler, more compact, and significantly more mobile than traditional ballistic missile launchers. Rather than relying on large, dedicated, specialized platforms, it can be deployed from more flexible and less conspicuous setups, systems that can be moved quickly, positioned rapidly, and prepared for launch in a much shorter time frame. This enables a shoot-and-move operational concept that has already proven highly effective in artillery and rocket systems throughout this conflict. Launch quickly from one position, immediately relocate before a counter-battery strike can arrive, and disappear before the enemy can organize a response. Applied to a ballistic missile system, this concept adds an entire additional layer of operational survivability that traditional systems simply cannot match. It also enables much wider dispersal of launch capability across the operational area. More potential launch positions means greater unpredictability for enemy intelligence analysts trying to determine where the next strike might originate. And greater unpredictability translates directly into a more demanding and resource-intensive counter-battery problem for Russian forces to solve. Even the warhead configuration reflects a specific and carefully considered operational purpose. The FP-7's warhead is not designed for penetrating deeply hardened underground bunkers or reinforced concrete structures requiring massive explosive energy. Instead, it is optimized for surface-level and lightly protected objectives, the kinds of targets that play absolutely critical roles in sustaining modern battlefield operations, but that do not necessarily require enormous explosive payloads to neutralize effectively. Radar installations that provide the targeting data for air defense networks. Forward command centers coordinating offensive operations. Supply depots storing fuel, ammunition, and equipment essential for sustaining frontline pressure. Critical communications infrastructure linking different echelons of a military operation. These targets, when successfully struck at the right moment, do not merely cause localized damage, they disrupt entire operational systems. They degrade coordination across wide areas. They force commanders to divert resources to reconstitution rather than offensive action. And the cumulative effect of sustained, accurate strikes against this category of target can be profoundly significant, even when the individual warheads involved are relatively modest in size. Looking further ahead, this development may represent only the beginning of a broader trajectory. Ukrainian defense officials and industry representatives have already indicated that future systems with greater range, larger payloads, and potentially even wider strategic reach are under active development. If those systems reach operational status, the balance of long-range strike capability in the theater could shift even more significantly than the FP-7 alone suggests. Because what is happening now is not simply about a single new weapon entering service. It is about the emergence of an entire independent Ukrainian ballistic missile capability, a system built on the foundational principles of speed, operational flexibility, and continuous rapid adaptation to the evolving demands of a high-intensity modern conflict. For much of this war, the Russian approach has relied heavily on mass, more troops cycling through the front, more artillery ammunition, more equipment to absorb losses and maintain pressure. Sheer numerical weight applied persistently against Ukrainian defensive lines. That approach has extracted an enormous cost, but as technology evolves, and as Ukraine's independent strike capabilities grow, the advantage of raw numbers becomes progressively less certain as a decisive factor. Because modern warfare is no longer determined solely by how much a military force possesses, it is determined by how effectively and intelligently those resources are applied, And, above all, by how quickly a force can identify opportunities, make decisions, and act, compressing the cycle of observation, decision, and action faster than the adversary can respond. The introduction of systems like the FP7 suggests that Ukraine's capacity for exactly that kind of rapid, adaptive, technology-driven warfare is continuing to accelerate. And if that trend continues in the months ahead, if the development pipeline delivers on what is currently being discussed, the front lines of this conflict may look very different indeed.